بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. إلى أن جاء الحافظ الفقيه تقي الدين أبو عمرو عثمان بن الصلاح عبد الرحمن الشهرزوري نزيل دمشق فجمع لما ولي تدريس الحديث بالمدرسة الأشرفية كتابه المشهور، فهذب فنونه وأملاه شيئا بعد شيء، فلهذا لم يحصل ترتيبه على الوضع المتناسب، واعتنى بتصانيف الخطيب المفرقة فجمع شتات مقاصدها وضم إليها من غيرها نخب فوائدها، فاجتمع في كتابه ما تفرق في غيره، فلهذا عكف الناس عليه وساروا بسيره، فلا يحصى كم ناظم له ومختصر ومستدرك عليه ومقتصر ومعارض له ومنتصر. Hafiz ibn Hajar rahmallah has given a very brief overview of books until the end of the 6th century. So now he concludes this discussion with the book of Allamah Ibn As-Salah rahimahullah. His full name is Abu Amr Taqiyuddin Uthman ibn Abdul Rahman ibn Uthman al-Kurdi. In the Maktaba Rushd print of Al-Yawaqit wa Durar, his birth year is cited as 504 Hijri, but this is incorrect as he was born in the year 577 Hijri and he passed away in 643 Hijri. Ibn Hajar rahmallah says, إلى أن جاء الحافظ الفقيه تقي الدين أبو عمرو عثمان بن الصلاح بن عبد الرحمن الشهرزوري نزيل دمشق, that these were the books until al-Hafiz al-Faqih تقي الدين عثمان بن عبد الرحمن الشهرزوري, a resident of Damascus, came. Ibn Hajar rahmallah first explains, he says, لما ولي تدريس الحديث بالمدرسة الأشرفية, when he was appointed to teach hadith in al-Madrasa al-Ashrafiyya. Allamah Ibn As-Salah rahimahullah was given the position to teach hadith and related sciences at Al-Madrasa Al-Ashrafiyya, a school that was founded by Ashraf, and the name of the school is also named after him. He was the ruler of Damascus at that time. So this madrasa officially opened on the 15th of Sha'ban in 628 Hijri. When we visited Damascus 12 years ago, classes still used to be conducted in the school. Allah Ta'ala knows best now whether the school is still standing or whether it has been demolished. The primary objective of this madrasa was to cater for those who wanted to specialize in hadith. And Allamah Ibn As-Salah rahmallah was given the most senior post. So Ibn Hajar rahmallah explains that during his career as a teacher, فجمع كتابه المشهور فهذب فنونه وأملاه شيئا بعد شيء, he gathered his famous book and then refined the various branches and dictated it gradually. Now notice here that Ibn Hajar rahmallah uses the word jama'a. He says that Allamah Ibn As-Salah rahmallah gathered his book. He does not say sannafa, that he wrote his book. So the reason for the use of this word jama'a is because Allamah Ibn As-Salah rahmallah needed to establish a syllabus, but he found that no book seemed compatible for teaching the terminology and the principles of hadith. Most of the books before him contained all the chains of transmission and verbatim quotations from earlier scholars. So such books would confuse beginners and it would even intimidate students. Furthermore, a lot of information was scattered between these books. Thus, when he could find no book to fit his exact needs, then Allamah Ibn As-Salah rahmallah finally decided that he would dictate and write his own book. So he conducted the research and then he would dictate his lessons, and these lessons were in turn documented and reproduced in a book format. Allamah Baqai rahmallah makes mention of this in An-Nukat al-Wafiyya. قيل إن ابن الصلاح أملا كتابه إملاء فكتبه في حال الإملاء جمع جم. Allamah Ibn As-Salah rahmallah dictated his book over intervals and a great number of people wrote down what he said. Allamah Ibn As-Salah rahmallah, his lessons commenced on the 7th of Ramadan in the year 630 Hijri and concluded on the last day of Muharram 634 Hijri. So it took just over 40 months to complete all the lessons of this book. This duration of 40 months is proven from the manuscript of Hafiz Ahmad ibn al-Iraqi rahimahullah. You can imagine what dedicated students Allamah Ibn As-Salah rahmallah was blessed with. Imagine studying a book for over 3 years. Of course, there were intervals in between, but those intervals were very few and they were also very brief. Like Mullah al-Qari rahmallah, he said, فَإِنَّ الْفُطُورِ يُؤَدِّي إِلَى الْقُصُورِ وَالتَّعْتِيلِ يُنْسِي التَّحْصِيلِ. Being lax causes a person to become deficient. وَالتَّعْتِيلِ يُنْسِي التَّحْصِيلِ. Being idle makes a person forget what he learned. الفطور يؤدي إلى القصور والتعطيل ينسي التحصيل. From this we understand that Allamah Ibn As-Salah rahmallah wrote this book in the latter part of his life. After he already traveled far and wide and he gained so much knowledge and so much insight and got so much of experience. So all of this obviously adds value to the book. As for the book itself, although this book is commonly known as Muqaddamah Ibn As-Salah, the actual name of this book is Ma'rifa Ulum al-Hadith. He uses this name often in another book of his that he was occupied with before he passed away, and that is Siyana Sahih Muslim, a commentary that he was writing. Hafiz Ibn As-Salah rahmallah began to write this commentary of Sahih Muslim, but unfortunately he wrote very little before he passed away. So to give 3 random examples, he says in this book, in his commentary which he was writing now days before he could pass away, وَقَدْ أَجَبْتُ عَلَيْهِمَا بِجَوَابَيْنِ أَحَدُهُمَا مَا ذَكَرْتُهُ فِي كِتَابِ مَعْرِفَةِ عُلُومِ الْحَدِيثِ. He says that I answered both of them with 2 answers, one of which I mentioned in the book, Ma'rifa Ulum al-Hadith. So you can see he's referring to the book as Ma'rifa Ulum al-Hadith. That means that this was the title of the book. A few pages later, on page 83, he said, وَقَدْ قَرَرْنَا فِي كِتَابِ مَعْرِفَةِ عُلُومِ الْحَدِيثِ أَنَّهُ إِذَا تَحَقَّقَ اللِّقَاءُ وَالسَّمَاءُ مَعَ السَّلَامَةِ مِنَ التَّدْلِيسِ إِلَى آخِرِهِ. And we have established in the book مَعْرِفَةِ عُلُومِ الْحَدِيثِ. Again, he takes the name as مَعْرِفَةِ عُلُومِ الْحَدِيثِ. And then one more example is, he says that وَقَدْ جَلَّيْتُ فِي كِتَابِ مَعْرِفَةِ عُلُومِ الْحَدِيثِ on page 96. I made it clear in the book مَعْرِفَةِ عُلُومِ الْحَدِيثِ. But then others tried to prove that actually the name of the book is Ma'rifa Anwa'i Ilm al-Hadith. And why would they say this? Because they say that much later in this very same commentary, he says that Alladhi bayyanahu fi kitabina fi anwa'i ulum al-hadith. So you can see how he's saying fi anwa'i ulum al-hadith, that which we made clear in our book, anwa'i ulum al-hadith. But here we can say that no, it's actually, he's not referring to the name of the book. Rather, he's mentioning that الَّذِي بَيَّنَّاهُ فِي كِتَابِنَا, that which we made clear in our a book which is about the various types of ulum al-hadith. So he's not referring to the name of the book. Nonetheless, his book was commonly known as Ulum al-Hadith, and after it was printed, it became known as Muqaddamah Ibn As-Salah. Now, as this book was essentially a compilation of written notes from the lessons of Allamah Ibn As-Salah rahmallah, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahmallah uses this fact as an excuse against the objection that the book is not in the best of orders. So he says, فَلِهَذَا لَمْ يَحْصُلْ تَرْتِيبُهُ عَلَى الْوَضْعِ الْمُتَنَاسِبِ. It is due to this reason that the order is not appropriate. Now here Hafiz ibn Hajar rahmallah offers an excuse for Allamah Ibn As-Salah rahimahullah, but he did not provide any excuses on those who he commented on earlier. He could have said that Allamah Muzi rahimahullah did not complete all the chapters of his book because he was writing just on one aspect, or Imam Hakim rahimahullah, he could have said with regards to him that his book was not perfect according to the opinion of Ibn Hajar, we have explained that it's actually in a very good order. So Ibn Hajar could have said that his book is not in the perfect of orders because he was the first to officially write on the topic of ulumul hadith. So Ibn Hajar rahmallah did not offer excuses for them, but he offers an excuse for Allamah Ibn As-Salah rahmallah. Nevertheless, the order of the book of Allamah Ibn As-Salah rahmallah is generally not bad, considering the fact that the book contains lectures that were transcribed, and that too over such a long period. It is understandable if there are a few minor things out of place. Allamah Ibn As-Salah rahmallah's greatest accomplishment was that he produced such a magnificent piece of work after looking in so many writings of his predecessors, and he successfully knew what to quote under which chapter. So this remarkable feat of his dwarfs and overshadows the minor defect of the book not being in the best of orders, or not having a very good sequence. وأمر الترتيب بعد ذلك أمر سهل يقدر عليه من أدنى منه بمراتب. Putting things together thereafter is rather simple. Any person who is much inferior to him can accomplish that. Now, since Allamah Ibn As-Salah rahmallah completed the mighty task of gathering all this information from so many different places, putting this information into a specific order is something which is very simple. So to understand this, take the following example. You have a person, he travels throughout the world to search for pearls. So he goes through mountainous regions, through forests and deserts and rural areas, and he even dives into the ocean to obtain saltwater pearls. So he bears the severe heat of some places, the extreme cold of other sites, the pollution in some regions, and the poor living conditions in other places. Now, after all of this effort, he returns with a bag of diamonds and rubies and tanzanite and some of the rarest pearls. Then he sorts out 98% of all that he got, and only a few stones are not put in the correct place. Now it would be, it won't be correct for a person to criticize him for this 2% which is not put in the correct place. Rather, you would have to focus on the 98% that he accomplished. So it is precisely for this reason that Hafiz Ibn Hajar rahimahullah first praised Ibn As-Salah rahimahullah, and then pointed out that the issue concerning the order of the book. He now explains how Allamah Ibn As-Salah rahimahullah wrote his book. So he says, وَاعْتَنَى بِالتَّصَانِيفِ الْخَطِيبِ الْمُفَرَّقَةِ فَجَمَعَ الشَّتَاتَ مَقَاصِدِهَا وَضَمَّ إِلَيْهَا مِنْ غَيْرِهَا نُخَبَ فَوَائِدِهَا. That he focused on the various books of Allamah Khatib. Earlier, Ibn Salah rahmallah mentioned that almost on every subject, on every topic, on every chapter, Allamah Khatib rahmallah wrote a dedicated book. So, Allamah Ibn Salah rahmallah first focused on gathering whatever is scattered in his various books, and thereafter he looked at the books of others. So Allamah Ibn Hajar is highlighting that Allamah Ibn Salah drew from the works of Allamah Khatib وَضَمَّ إِلَيْهَا مِنْ غَيْرِهَا نُخَبَ فَوَائِدِهَا. He also took from the books of others, for example from Allamah Ibn Abdul Barr rahmallah and Imam Hakim rahimahullah, فَجَتَمَعَ فِي كِتَابِهِ مَا تَفَرَّقَ فِي غَيْرِهِ. Hence that which was scattered in other books were all grouped together in his book. So gathering all these nuqul in this manner definitely overshadows the slight defect of this order and this organization of the information. فَلِهَذَا عَكَفَ النَّاسُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَارُوا بِسَيْرِهِ. It is for this reason that people then clung to this book and followed its pathways. So due to the brilliance of the book that Allamah Ibn Salah rahmallah presented, scholars after him became greatly attached to this book. Now here Ibn Hajar rahmallah uses the word akafa. It comes from the word al-akf wal-ukuf, and it means إقبال الناس على شيء بحيث لا يصرف وجوههم عنه. People immerse themselves in a particular manner that they do not even turn their faces away. So the word akafa is used when one takes on a task with his mind, with his body, and with his soul, and he devotes himself completely to that task. And the word i'tikaf is also derived from this. And it is called i'tikaf because a person devotes himself fully to the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is the extent of attachment that scholars had with Muqaddamah Ibn As-Salah. Hafiz ibn Hajar rahmallah says, فَلَا يُحْصَى كَمْ نَاظِمٍ لَهُ وَمُخْتَصِرٍ. It cannot be enumerated how many scholars put the text in poetry form. وَمُخْتَصِرٍ, the amount of scholars who abridged the text. وَمُسْتَدْرِكٍ عَلَيْهِ, what a great number added onto it. وَمُقْتَصِرٍ, the huge number who condensed the text. وَمُعَارِضٍ لَهُ, those who wrote rebuttals. وَمُنْتَصِرٍ, and those who wrote responses. So we will elucidate and give examples of each of these. كَمْ نَاظِمٍ لَهُ, some scholars such as Allamah Iraqi rahmallah and Allamah Suyuti rahmallah, they arranged the text of Muqaddamah Ibn As-Salah in poetic form. So both of their poems are called Alfiya because they both arranged the text into 1,000 lines of poetry. So Alfiya means 1,000. So you will commonly hear that these poems are being referred to as Alfiyatul Iraqi or Alfiyatul Suyuti, the Alfiya of Allamah Iraqi, the Alfiya of Allamah Suyuti rahimahullah. Thereafter, both Allamah Iraqi rahimahullah and Allamah Suyuti rahimahullah then both wrote commentaries on their poems. Allamah Iraqi rahimahullah wrote Sharh al-Tabsira wa Tadhkira, and Allamah Suyuti rahimahullah wrote Al-Bahr al-Ladhi Zakhar. Others also wrote commentaries on the Alfiya of Allamah Iraqi rahimahullah, such as Allamah Sakhawi rahimahullah, who wrote Fathul Mughith. Then Ibn Hajar said, وَمُخْتَصِرٍ. So what's the meaning of مُخْتَصِرٍ? اختصار. The meaning is الاتيان بالمقصود كله بلفظ أقل من الأول. Bring in all of the intended meaning with less words than the first. So ikhtisar is an abridgment, a shortened form of the work that retains the general idea of the original reading. Every point of the book is mentioned, but it is just that it is in less words and in a shorter form. But every point which is mentioned in the initial book, all the points are mentioned in this book. Examples of scholars who abridged the book of Allamah Ibn As-Salah rahmallah in this way are Allamah Badruddin ibn Jama'ah, likewise Allamah Tibi, and Imam Nawawi rahmallah also in Irshad Tullab al-Haqa'iq and in At-Taqrib. Hafiz ibn Hajar rahmallah quotes from Allamah Iraqi rahmallah that the best ikhtisar is that of Alauddin ibn Turkumani. So he was a great Hanafi scholar. Under his entry in Raf'ul Isr, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahmallah praises his abridgment, and he also quotes from Allamah Iraqi rahmallah. So he brings his name, Ali ibn Uthman ibn Ibrahim ibn Mustafa ibn Sulaiman al-Maridini Alauddin al-Ma'ruf ibn Turkumani al-Hanafi. And there he says, وَكَانَ كَثِيرَ الْإِفْضَالِ مع مشاركة في علم الحديث واختصر كتاب ابن الصلاح اختصارا حسنا. He abridged the book of Allamah Ibn As-Salah rahmallah in a brilliant way. And then he says, سمعت شيخنا العراقي يقول, that I heard our teacher Allamah Iraqi rahmallah saying that إنه أوفى بمقصوده. He done justice to the topics. And then he said that Allamah Iraqi rahmallah also said, وَلَا نَعْلَمُ أَحَدًا سَاوَاهُ فِي ذَلِكَ. We do not know of anyone who matched him in that. So the title of this abridged book is Al-Muntakhab fi Ulum al-Hadith, and it is published by Al-Ulwan with the tahqiq of Dr. Bashar Al-Khalaf. So this is a book that we recommend that you should invest in, especially if you do not intend to study Muqaddamah Ibn As-Salah after Nuzha an-Naḍar, then you should try to get this and at least go through this book. Then Ibn Hajar rahmallah said, وَمُسْتَدْرِكٍ عَلَيْهِ. So istidrak. Istidrak refers to when one takes the original work and then adds additional points that he think the author perhaps missed out, but are nonetheless relevant and important. An example of this is Allamah Bulqini rahimahullah. He added a few things in his book Mahasin al-Istilah. Then he says وَمُقْتَصِر اقتصار. So the meaning of مقتصر is هو الاتيان ببعض المقاصد. It is summarizing in a way that only some aspects are mentioned. So you're not mentioning all the points that the author brought in the original work. Iqtisar refers to condensing or shortening a book by omitting some of the points that are mentioned in the original work. And from here you can understand the difference between muqtasir and mukhtasir. When there's ikhtisar, then all the points are mentioned. It's just that it is in less words. And when there's iqtisar, then some points are left out, and that is how come it is shorter. وَمُعَارِضٍ لَهُ. Now this word mu'arid has two meanings. So the first meaning is a person who tries to compete with the author and to produce then a similar work. In our case it will be Ibn As-Salah rahmallah. So for example, Allamah Ibn Abi Dam, he tried to produce a book which is on par with Muqaddamah Ibn As-Salah. So that's the one meaning of mu'arid. And the second meaning, which is the preferred meaning here, is when someone objects and he objects on the author's work and he tries to refute him. For example, Allamah Mughultai rahmallah, he continuously raises objections against Allamah Ibn As-Salah rahimahullah. وَمُنْتَصِر. So muntasir refers to those who defend the author. For example, Allamah Iraqi rahmallah in his Nukat, which is also known as At-Taqyid wal-Idah, and likewise Hafiz ibn Hajar rahmallah in his Nukat, they both defended Allamah Ibn As-Salah rahmallah and responded to those objections and refutations. So looking at this great amount of books that are centered around this book of Allamah Ibn As-Salah rahmallah, all this is enough to illustrate how so many scholars began to focus on this book. Now, bearing in mind that everything that Hafiz ibn Hajar rahmallah is writing here, he's writing it 200 years after, actually less than 200 years after the passing of Allamah Ibn As-Salah rahmallah. Because Allamah Ibn As-Salah rahmallah, he completed this book in the year 634 Hijri. And Hafiz ibn Hajar rahmallah is writing all of these praises in the year 818 Hijri. So this clearly shows us the acceptance and the status that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave to this book, that within such a short period of less than 200 years, it already got such acceptance. Shaykh Muhyiddin Abdul Hamid, he said in his introduction of Tawdīḥ al-Afkār, ولو لم يكن من حظوة هذا الكتاب إلا أن يتصدى له الإمام النووي وابن كثير وابن جماعة والزركشي والعراقي وابن حجر حفاظ أزمانهم، ثم لو لم يكن له حظوة إلا أن يتفرغ له الحافظ العراقي الزمن الطويل. He said, if there is no other merit of this book except that you had great scholars like Imam Nawawi rahimahullah and Allamah Ibn Kathir rahimahullah and such stalwarts like Ibn Jama'ah rahimahullah, experts like Allamah Zarkashi rahimahullah, masters in the field like Allamah Iraqi and Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, wa huffadu azmanihim, they were the huffad and the senior muhaddithin of the time. If just looking at this fact that they focused on this kitab, ثم لو لم يكن له حظوة إلا أن يتفرغ له الحافظ العراقي الزمن الطويل. And then also bearing in mind the fact that Hafiz Iraqi is such a great portion of his life, so much time he dedicated to this book. لو لم يكن من الحظوة إلا ذلك لكان كافيا ودليلا مع ذلك على منزلة الكتاب ومنزلة صاحبه. If that was the only thing, then that would have been sufficient to explain to us how great the kitab is and the great status of the author of the kitab. Moving on, حافظ ابن حجر رحمه الله says فسألني بعض الإخوان أن ألخص له المهم من ذلك فلخصته في أوراق لطيفة سميتها نخبة الفكر في مصطلح أهل الأثر على ترتيب ابتكرته وسبيل انتهجته مع ما ضممت إليه من شوارد الفرائد وزوائد الفوائد فرغب إلي ثانيا أن أضع عليها شرحا يحل رموزها ويفتح كنوزها ويوضح ما خفي على المبتدئ من ذلك فأجبته إلى سؤاله رجاء الاندراج في تلك المسالك فبالغت في شرحها في الإيضاح والتوجيح ونبهت على خفايا زواياها لأن صاحب البيت أدرى بما فيه وظهر لي أن إيراده على صورة البسط أليق ودمجها ضمن توضيحها أوفق فسلكت هذه الطريقة القليلة السالك. After listing all of these books, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahmallah now discusses his reasons and motivation for writing this kitab. An important point to note is that most of the scholars who wrote on the topic of ulum al-Hadith, they were all Shafi'i scholars. There are a few exceptions here and there, like for example Qadi Iyad and Ibn Abdul Barr rahmallah, they were Malikis, but majority were Shafi'is. And the result of this year is that you will find lots of these principles correspond with the Shafi'i madhab, because all of these Shafi'i scholars, they presented the principles in a way that conforms to their madhab. So Sheikh Awama, he mentions this in the introduction of Tadrib al-Rawi. He says, وَإِنَّ أَرْكَانَ عِلْمِ مُصْطَلَحِ الْحَدِيثِ رَحِمَهُمُ اللَّهُ هُمْ الحاكم والبيهقي والخطيب وابن الصلاح والنووي والعراقي والزركشي وابن حجر والسخاوي والسيوطي ومؤلفاتهم المتداولة في أركان هذا العلم وأقوالهم في السائرة المرجوع إليها يضاف إليهم ابن جماعة والطيبي والتبريزي والعلائي وابن كثير والأبناسي والبلقيني وابن الملقن ثم القسطلاني ثم المناوي كل هؤلاء. So all of these great scholars وغيرهم هم من حيث المذهب الفقهي فقهاء شافعية. So he's saying that all of these great scholars who were experts in this field, they were all from the Shafi'i madhab. ومعلوم اشتراك مباحث السنة من علم أصول الفقه مع أصول الحديث, that the knowledge of علوم الحديث and أصول الفقه are combined. فمزج هؤلاء الأئمة كتبهم في علم أصول الحديث بآراء أئمتهم الشافعية الأصولية الفقهية لا سيما وأن الإمام الشافعي رحمه الله وسائر علماء المسلمين كتب أبحاثا كثيرا تدخل في العلمين فصار علم أصول الفقه فصار علم أصول الحديث أو مصطلح الحديث مصطلحا شافعيا. So he's saying that all of these scholars, they gathered all of their books and they gathered statements of scholars of their madhab, and even Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah, he wrote a little on this topic, so they gathered it, and therefore the science of hadith now became according to the Shafi'i madhab. Therefore we will differ much in this book because we will be studying it from a Hanafi perspective, and Hanafi scholars, they retain their principles and approach to hadith in the books of Usul al-Fiqh. So we will quote the books of Usul al-Fiqh very often.